horror, nostalgia, and a whole lot of laughter. Netflix's hit TV show Stranger Things has been offering the world all of that and more for about 6 years now. But even the show's biggest fans might not know what goes on behind the scenes. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the things that you definitely didn't know about Stranger Things. First up, the show's inspiration. Stranger Things has been such a hit with people with all ages, not only because of the show's unique storyline, but because of all the homages that the show has paid to the 80s, with references to things like Ghostbusters, Back to the Future, Star Wars, and of course, Dungeons and Dragons. The show takes you on a nostalgia trip that's unlike any other. But the reason why the show is so heavily inspired by this specific decade is that the Duffer Brothers, who produced the show, were actually inspired by their own childhood and decided to base the show on that. The boy gang in the show is heavily inspired by the Duffer Brothers' own group of friends, who would spend hours playing board games and exploring the woods near their homes. So the show is their fantastical spin on their autobiographies. Next, we have the show's original name. Before Stranger Things took over Netflix and the whole world by relation, it was supposed to be referred to by a very, very different name that probably wouldn't have made sense to most of us. Originally, the show was supposed to be called Montauk. In fact, the Duffer Brothers had actually created the show's pitch Bible with the same name, as they tried to convince different networks to pick it up. Now, some of you might have caught on to the reference, but for those of you who didn't, Montauk was actually the setting for Jaws, which is one of the major inspirations for the show. Montauk is also a site where the Montauk Project conspiracy theory originated. The theory talks about how the place was where scientists were researching different supernatural phenomena, similar to the ones that we see in the show. So, why did the Duffer Brothers change the name? Well, because they didn't want to run into any trouble, and they wanted much more creative freedom over their storyline, and thus, Stranger Things was born. And now, the music. As the Duffer Brothers were trying to set the tone for their brand new show, they decided that music had to be an important part of it all. Now, going by the show's brilliant soundtrack, it's easy to say that they succeeded in their mission, but there's a lot more to this musical story than people know. Just like every other element of the show, the Duffer Brothers wanted the score to replicate the sense of nostalgia that they were trying to go for. So the producers decided to hire two members of a synth band called Survive to come up with a totally new and unique soundtrack based on the show's storyline. And, well, let's just say that they delivered. After using one of the band's songs to edit a mock trailer for the show, the Duffer Brothers knew that this was the band that was going to be working with them on sound design, since they were able to emulate the exact mood that was required for this sci-fi storyline. Next, casting the leads. Once the Duffer Brothers knew the direction that the show was going to go in, they also knew that the child actors had to be cast early on. But to make sure that they got actors who would perfectly fit their roles, the producers auditioned over 1,000 kids, making them read lines from the Stephen King classic Stand By Me, which revolved around a group of boys who go on an adventure to find a dead body in the middle of the woods. The book serves as a partial source material for the show, so it's only fitting that the producers wanted to see their potential actors and what they could do with it. Another reason why the Duffer Brothers wanted to cast the children before they had even finished writing the story was they wanted to tailor the roles that they cast to their own actors. They wanted their personalities to add a layer of realism to the show and make the young children feel comfortable in their performances. Once they had their cast, they really got to know their actors' strengths and push their limits depending on those. All of this led to one of the most convincing and authentic child performances that the world has ever seen in a TV show. Now for Winona Ryder's influence. Since the Duffer Brothers were already going all out and trying to replicate those 80s vibes, the producers also decided to hire some faces that practically defined the era, with one of them being Winona Ryder, who plays the lovable role of Joyce, Will's mother. Back in the day, Ryder starred in multiple sci-fi and thriller films such as Heathers and Beetlejuice. So when the Duffer Brothers were presented with the idea of casting a previous 80s it girl to be part of their show, they jumped at the chance to call in Winona to read for the part, which she absolutely nailed, of course. But of course, Winona's role in the show was way different from the characters that she had already portrayed, giving the fans something brand new to experience. Now on to the deal with Ego. Ever since the show premiered its first season, Ego has become almost synonymous with the Stranger Things brand. Eleven stepping out of the store with her nose bleeding and a bunch of Eggo boxes in her hands has to be one of the most iconic TV moments in history. Now, while Eggo wasn't originally an official part of the show, the company saw its sales rise the minute Stranger Things premiered. In the aftermath of it all, the company allowed Netflix to use a retro 80s-inspired Eggo commercial in the trailer for the second season of the show, and then it released a limited special packaging version of Eggo in time for the show's third season. Up next, the second season. Most of us can't imagine our lives without the Stranger Things gangs, right? Seeing them grow up as the show progresses, watching their characters fall in love, having their first kiss and whatnot has been just as exciting as the show's primary storyline. But the truth is that things weren't always going to go this way. In fact, the Duffer Brothers were actually hoping that the show was going to be an anthology series, where every season would feature new characters and brand new storylines. So essentially, Mike, Elle, and the rest of the gang were supposed to bid us farewell at the end of the very first season. Even when the show became a hit, the Duffer Brothers debated doing something different with a sequel, with one of the ideas being setting the sequel years later, showing the main cast as adults who return to Hawkins when things start taking a turn. But thankfully, both of these ideas were let go, and the producers decided to just keep the momentum of the show going as it already was. Now for filming costs. At first glance, you can tell that Stranger Things is no ordinary show. With incredible visuals, brilliant sets, and special effects that only add to its already immersive story, the filming of the show takes quite a bit of resources and time. In fact, the filming budget of Stranger Stranger Things is nowhere close to that of an average TV show, but it actually goes up to that of a feature film. Now, this makes sense because initially the Duffer Brothers were going to turn the first 2 seasons of the show into 2 long movies, but then they decided against that since they realized that a show would be a much better format for the story that they were trying to tell, but that came with its own costs. Every episode of the first season cost $6 million, with the budget for the other seasons only increasing from that point. And now on to filming effects. One of the reasons why it's so expensive to make is the special effects, of course. But that's not all. After basing the show in the 80s, the Duffer Brothers also wanted to make it look like it had actually been filmed in the same decade. So what they did was they copied filming techniques and camera movements from back in the day to replicate those visuals. And while the show was shot on digital cameras instead of film, the editors were asked to add grain in post-production to make the show feel like it had been shot on an old-time camera. Finally, the mall for season 3. A huge part of the show's 3rd season takes place in what we know to be the only hall in Mawkins, the Starcourt Mall. It has all the feels of an 80s shopping center with retro storefronts that include iconic brands like The Gap. It was huge back in the decade. One of the teasers for the 3rd season also featured a mock ad for the fictional mall as a foreshadowing of all that went down there. But you'll be surprised that this mall was actually built entirely from scratch to replicate all the elements of the 80s. The entire set was designed from the real-life Gwinnett Place Mall in Georgia, but the whole place from the ground up was taken apart and then reconstructed to make it look like it belonged in the past. And that's a wrap for things you didn't know about the Netflix hit series Stranger Things. Which of these took you by surprise? Let us know in the comment section below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stuff like this. See you next time.